If adventure films have a name, it must be Indiana Jones. From its incredible locations to its thrilling action to the iconic character and star at its center, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas's series set the template for the modern adventure film, with Harrison Ford's Nazi-fighting archaeologist traveling around the world in a series of movies that homaged and updated the adventure serials its creators loved as kids. Growing up, the Indiana Jones trilogy blew my mind and opened up my heart to stories that occupied my every waking moment. But no matter how many times I've watched them, these movies always captivate me, excited for the next incredible sequence to play out, even if I know every line, every beat, every punch. Somewhere between the performances, action, iconography, music, and thrills was a mix that captivated me. And I'm not alone in loving a franchise that has been often copied, but never beaten. While there are so many amazing elements behind the scenes of Indiana Jones, each deserving of their own video, here we'll look at the practical, incredible stunts that brought some of the series' most famous images to life, the people that made them possible, the stories behind the stunts, and the legacy of these amazing feats that have come to define Indiana Jones, and shaped hundreds of movies that have followed in its footsteps. Stunt work is as old as film itself, with 1903's The Great Train Robbery possibly featuring the first ever stunt double. Over time, the on-screen stunt became a major attraction in silent film, thanks to the work of actors like Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, who put their bodies on the line for moments that are still being homaged today. Eventually, the dangers of stunt work led to the rise of stunt doubles, who would sub in for actors in the most dangerous feats. One of the earliest and most influential stuntmen was Yakima Canutt, remember that name, and the rise of westerns, swashbucklers, action movies, and adventure films made professional stunt work, stunt coordinators, continually improving safety features, and the stunt double an essential part of modern movie making. This is all to say that by the time Raiders of the Lost Ark went into production in 1980, stunt technology, performance, and planning were essentially at their peak. But visual effects and a pre-CGI world meant that, aside from some god-induced skull melting, anything a film crew wanted to put on screen had to be done practically. And that's what makes Raiders and the Indiana Jones series overall so special. These are films continuing the legacy of a century of stunt work, through the stories of an adventurer getting into increasingly insane situations. A perfect escalation of stakes and scale that culminate in the supernatural, while still using both stunt performers and a very vulnerable lead character to sell the impact and danger of every hit, jump, and gunshot. I'm not saying anything new when I say that Raiders of the Lost Ark is a masterpiece, and a large part of its appeal, beyond, the perfectly constructed script, one of film history's greatest directors fully in control of his skills, and the absolute hunk at the height of his charisma that is Harrison Ford, is the incredibly thrilling action modeled after the film serials that Lucas and Spielberg loved as kids. The brainchild of Lucas, both Star Wars and Raiders have their roots in these weekly shorts. But where Star Wars was inspired by Flash Gordon, Indiana Jones was rooted in Don Winslow of the Navy, along with several other inspirations. Carl Barks's Uncle Scrooge comics can't be discounted, and the inspiration to give his close friend Steven Spielberg a James Bond-esque adventure series of his own after Eon turned him down. When you watch those old serials, they don't really live up to the perfection that is Indy, but it's the spirit of those multi-part shorts, each ending on a cliffhanger and drawing viewers back for yet another chapter of non-stop adventure that informs the structure of Raiders, and each film that follows, with Lawrence Kasdan's script turning Lucas and Philip Kaufman's story into a modern adventure. At the time of Raiders' release, Spielberg's film was seen as so much faster and crazier and more intense than any action movie that had come before. And yeah, the pacing is really brisk, even by today's standards. But it's by no means unfocused. It's just that it constantly moves forward without losing a step, moving from set piece to set piece with small, interconnective scenes that help define the stakes for what's to come. Ark discovery into Well of Souls escape, into plane fight, into truck chase, all in the span of 30 minutes. Wild. To keep Raiders on schedule and under budget, a major concern for Paramount after Jaws and Close Encounters grew out of control, Spielberg and artist Ed Veroux storyboarded the film in detail before the shoot began in the UK's Elstree Studios, Hawaii, France, and more locations. Once in Tunisia, some of Raiders' biggest action sequences were largely completed by the film's second unit, directed by Mickey Moore and made up of about 50 people, including stunt coordinator Glenn Randall, cameraman Paul Beeson, assistant director Carlos Gill, continuity supervisor Maggie Jones, and a host of stuntmen including Vic Armstrong, Chuck Waters, Terry Leonard, and Peter Diamond. Just about every stunt actor got injured at some point, but Vic Armstrong became the main double for Ford due to their similar likeness. And this team of performers helped bring both Indy and the legion of bad guys to life in Raiders and the films to come. Here are some of the recurring team members that helped create Indy's action across these films. Vic Armstrong, Harrison Ford's stunt double in Raiders, Temple, and Last Crusade, as well as stunt arranger in Temple and stunt coordinator in Last Crusade. Wendy Leach, stunt double for all lead women in Raiders, Temple, and Last Crusade. Pat Roach, multiple big enemies, including the giant Sherpa and the monstrous mechanic in Raiders, the chief guard in Temple, and a very small cameo in Crusade. Mickey Moore, second unit director for Raiders, Temple, and Crusade. Frank Marshall, producer and executive producer on Raiders through Crystal Skull, and second unit director on Raiders, Temple, and Crusade. Glenn Randall, stunt coordinator for Raiders and stunt arranger, stuntman, and second unit director for Temple. Chuck Waters, stunts for Raiders, Temple, and Crusade. Of course, there are dozens and even hundreds more that came and went across these movies, in addition to our major recurring creators. Okay, so you might be saying, what's the big deal about stunt work? It's all there on the page, you just gotta shoot it. Well, here's an example of what makes stunts important. The Raiders boulder scene is essentially in Kasdan's script, but compare the moment, a fairly simple paragraph, to the completed film. Indy shoots out of a cut-off hallway and turns toward the exit. The rumbling is very loud, and now we see why. Right behind Indy, a huge boulder comes roaring around a corner of the passage, perfectly form-fitted to the passageway. It obliterates everything before it, sending the stalactites shooting ahead like missiles. Indy dashes for the light of the exit. His hat flies off his head. Almost immediately, it is crushed by the boulder. Indy dives out of the end of the passage as the boulder slams to a perfect fit at the entrance, sealing the temple. The combination of Ford and stunt double Martin Grace tripping and running from a 300-pound wooden fiberglass boulder, cinematographer Douglas Slocum's moody but perfectly framed shot composition, some deviations from the script, and editor Michael Kahn's perfect stitching together of 10 takes, created something far more iconic than just the initial idea of a giant rolling rock. Not every stunt or effect is as instantly iconic, but there are so many little ones that I think make this a perfect adventure story. The flaming bar fight, complete with a near-miss alcohol fire, burning logs over heads, and a wild shootout. The impaled fruit gag, the flying wing fight, with the running plane actually moved by a team pulling it by rope. And of course, so many explosions. Massive waves of illness, food poisoning, and exhaustion from the heat would wipe out waves of the Raiders crew every few days, putting extra strain on an already difficult shoot, and leading to one of the film's most iconic moments. What was originally supposed to be an elaborate whip and sword fight became a perfect little subversion, as Ford was too sick to shoot the plan. The whip itself is a stunt, with Ford trained in using it and replaced by several different stunt actors to effectively crack the cord. For swinging, the whip was actually a steel cable covered in leather to properly support the weight of stuntmen. Of course, getting whip to wrap around and stay on a beam is a bit of movie magic, but it feels like second nature given how many different movies, shows, and games have copied it since. The climax of Indy's chase after the kidnapped Marion ends with the Nazi-controlled truck flipping and exploding. And to make the truck violently turn over, a hydraulically powered post was installed, slamming down into the ground to tip the truck. You can see it right there. Decades later, Christopher Nolan would employ the same trick on a grander scale with his own truck flip in The Dark Knight. Once you know the seams are there, you can spot them, but the practical effect is still stunning. Of course, when you talk about Raider stunts, everybody has to talk about the truck chase. In a scene where Indy goes from horse to behind the wheel to under the truck to back in control, the chase is an absolute marvel of modern stunt work and action filmmaking, combining off-road stunt driving with hand-to-hand fighting in a scene that essentially functions as its own mini-movie, tracking the injuries that Indy sustains and the damage done to the truck without a word spoken. Spielberg and Moore worked to ensure audiences understand how Indy's injuries weaken him in a fight, and why he makes the specific choices to survive while on and under the truck. It all climaxes with one of the most iconic stunts in film history, and my choice for the second greatest stunt in the franchise. We'll get to the greatest in a little bit. It was Terry Leonard in the leather jacket and hat here, and it was actually Leonard who suggested the centerpiece of Indy going under and being dragged behind the truck, as homage to pioneering stuntman Yakima Knut, who slid under horses in Stagecoach and a coach in Zorro's Fighting Legion. Leonard had previously tried to do the stunt on a remake of The Lone Ranger, but was run over, and saw this as his chance. With Glenn Randall driving the truck, the only one Leonard trusted to be behind the wheel, a miles-long trench was dug to give the stuntman enough clearance underneath to stay safe, meaning that Randall had to drive at just the right speed and at just the right angle for Leonard to complete the scene. And guess what? The truck drag is one of the greatest stunts in film history. It's practically synonymous with stunt work. Of course, no stunt stands on its own, and even the best stunt can be screwed up with bad choices. The stunts of Raiders, Temple, and Last Crusade exist within incredible productions. You have to believe the character, believe the world, and then believe that the things you're seeing are possible within that context and when done by that person. If not, then you have a scene that looks really cool, but doesn't mean much more than that. Raiders makes it clear early on that Indy is fallible. That little moment with the root says everything. And from then on, we're alongside a character that will get beat up, dirty, tired, and sore, feeling all the bumps and bruises with him. Of course, not everything is practical in Raiders, like the green screen stormy sky or the supernatural forces that kill the Nazis, but the animals are very real. Raiders sets a lot of templates for the films to come, and one recurring element is a gross-out, borderline horror scene featuring some sort of creepy crawly creature. Here, it's snakes. Thousands of snakes were brought in from several reptile breeders across Europe. Lengths of garden hose were used to fill in the gaps for the massive set, and a pane of glass kept Ford safe from the face-to-face Cobra encounter. I don't think there's any animal scene that tops this one. Scary, funny, gross, and full of great character beats playing off Indy's phobia and Marion's panic. Harrison Ford is one of the greatest movie stars of all time. That's not just because of the acting skills he displays in these films, or the megawatt charisma that some people are just born with, but because of his willingness to be vulnerable, flawed, and even the butt of the joke on the biggest stage possible. That's all there in Han Solo, but it's crucial in Indiana Jones because of its combination with the stunts we're discussing. I know in making these movies, I'm going to get dirty, bruised, and bumped around a lot, said Ford. Bumps and bruises go with the territory. It's what distinguishes an Indiana Jones movie from any other adventure film. You sit there in the theater and know I'm doing it. Indy's next adventure would have to largely make do without him. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a rip-roaringly racist spectacle of modern cinema, but we really don't have to relitigate it. Temple is, of course, a mixed bag, and its reputation of being the dark and weird entry in the franchise is well-earned, especially when sandwiched between Raiders and Last Crusade. Still, the film is dedicated to upping the intensity and stakes of the first, complete with a new level of on-screen effects and stunts. When you think stunts, your mind doesn't necessarily jump to musical numbers, but folded within the spirit of Spielberg's old-school approach to these movies, the Danny Daniels choreographed Anything Goes dance that opens Temple of Doom reminds its audiences that this film, like the one before, is dedicated to the old Hollywood films that inspired it. The entire Club Obi-Wan sequence is the highlight of the movie, giving the film its requisite James Bond-style end-of-an-adventure opening, and this time using it to roll right into the larger story. Several falling stunts, most notably the jump out of the club and the fall down the broken bridge, use Vic Armstrong's invention, the fan descender. Here, stunt performers are attached by wire to a spindle with fan blades. As the performer falls, the spindle spins like a fan, which creates air pressure and slows the fall for a controlled descent that still looks real. The thrills of Temple of Doom are, however, more dependent on optical effects than Raiders. The inflatable raft escape and the minecart chase are a combination of green screen, miniatures, stunts, and insert shots. But I was still obsessed with them as a kid. I doubt I'm alone either. Basically, 30 years of video games from Donkey Kong Country to the Resident Evil 4 remake have made their own version of the minecart scene. And the Indiana Jones adventure at Disneyland aesthetically and tonally has the most in common with Temple. And just like the production of Temple, the Indiana Jones ride is littered with constant issues that compromise its production. Thank you. In addition to the miniature track, mine ride shots with actors were accomplished by building a soundstage encircling ride using 2 parallel tracks, one for the minecart and one for the camera, that essentially acted like a roller coaster. The rope bridge scene was made possible by having the bridge made of steel cables hidden within ropes 150 feet above the water that were blown on command. And all the bodies dropping to their doom, mechanical dummies that automatically swung their arms and legs around in fake panic. Those moments are incredible because it's one go, said Robert Watts. If we'd blown it, we could have never re-rigged the bridge without rebuilding it. Spielberg's commitment to practicality, however, wasn't without its drawbacks. Ford was run over by one of the flying wing wheels in Raiders, tearing his ACL. But the worst injury occurred when Ford first injured his back while riding an elephant in Temple. I had tried everything and nothing helped, said Ford. Then I woke up one morning and after I stood up by the side of the bed, I realized I was unable either to move forward or get back in bed. Still, the actor continued on, and during his hotel room fight, the actor herniated his back and was flown out for chemonucleosis spinal treatment. Once you know that Ford is basically incapable of performing most of the film's action, the way Spielberg cuts the film to hide stunt double faces in full body shots and only shoot his lead in close-up for these sequences becomes really obvious. The Rock Crusher fight in particular is mostly Vic Armstrong as Indy and Pat Roach as his opponent. Still, it's a testament to the dedication of the stunt performers, a severely injured Ford, and an improvising Spielberg that Temple's action sequences work so well. In total, 7 weeks of Temple were shot without Ford. The creepy crawly featured in Temple is a buttload of bugs, and according to Frank Marshall, who helped shoot Second Unit with the bug scene, about 50,000 cockroaches and 30,000 beetles were brought on set for the sequence in total. Like everything in Temple, it's very extreme in its interpretation of the precedent set by Raiders. And while I don't love the sequel, I think it's still a really fun thrill ride offset by odd tonal choices. I think we went darker than any of us really wanted to go, said Lucas. But I don't mind the film. We definitely wanted to make a different movie from Raiders. We didn't want to just do the same movie over again. In response to Temple's mixed reputation, Part 3 would be a necessary readjustment for the series. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is my personal favorite of the series, and one of my favorite movies of all time. As a kid, I basically wore out my VHS because I couldn't stop watching it. Now, I think it's a marvel of blockbuster movie making, filled with spectacle, amazing characters, perfect pacing, and real, honest emotion. Like each film, Last Crusade has a cold open mini-story. Here, a flashback to what is essentially Indy's origin, and a really great train sequence, with all sorts of dangerous zoo animals, some real, some mechanical, and action on top of a moving train free from green screens. From there, all of Last Crusade operates on a grand scale, with everything in motion. Giant crumbling sets, an enormous recreation of a ship during a storm tossing around stunt actors, horseback riding for both actors and doubles, fiery escapes, and all the requisite punches, whips, and swings. In particular, the splintering boat interrogation used long lenses and forced perspective to make it seem like our characters were much closer to death than they really were, all filmed in a water tank. I'm also a huge fan of the motorcycle chase, makeshift jousting, several giant flips, and just the general uniqueness of a sidecar forcing our leads to connect in the midst of danger. Personally, I think the tank fight is the greatest sequence of the entire franchise because of the scale, very personal stakes of this rescue, and the many escalating action beats that make up the larger fight. Interestingly, it was largely a byproduct of Spielberg and crew coming up with new story beats and stunts during the shoot, ballooning the shoot from 2.5 days to 10. The tank itself goes from obstacle to enemy to setting. Built brand new for the film by effects supervisor George Gibbs, the tank would only go at speeds of around 10 to 12 miles per hour. But the framing, slowing of frame rate while shooting, and editing of it all makes this thing look like a speeding, unstoppable war machine. It's not just that the tank fight features some incredible horseback riding, or that it has the most impossible odds for Indy in the entire franchise, but that every single beat is predicated on a stunt that hits hard, and is completely propelled by character motivations and relationships. These flip back and forth between serious and comedic, so that 1 minute a fun choice made by Henry Sr. makes you laugh, and the next you feel how genuinely concerned Indy and his father are for one another. Car crashes, flips, explosions, near crushings, all done while in motion. While there's definitely shootouts throughout these films, guns are more of an exclamation point on Indy action instead of the centerpiece. Little moments like Indy shooting the swordsman or the bullet that goes through multiple Nazis are great choices, but more often than not, Indy is balling up his fists and swinging like a barroom brawler. It's nothing fancy, but it looks and sounds great. The result of perfect choreography and just the right camera angle to make a fake punch that doesn't connect look like a haymaker. With Ford largely on horseback under the supervision of now stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong, there's so much more emotion and character beats here than in the largely limited performance of Temple. Harrison is very tough and he wants to do everything himself, said Armstrong. You've got to keep holding him back. He is physically fit enough to do it all, but he is the star and you can't risk anything happening to him. So it's a fine line that you have to walk, letting Harrison participate as much as you feel is physically safe for him. There's this great stunt in Raiders when Indy jumps from a galloping horse onto the side of a moving truck, all in one take. Well, Last Crusade features the heir to that stunt, and what I feel is the franchise's best stunt ever. As Indy, played by Armstrong here, gallops up an embankment, chases after a speeding tank, and leaps from the moving horse, through the air for more than 10 feet, and onto the tank, looking both effortless and brutal all at once. Once again, Spielberg and Lucas returned to animal gross-out gags with hundreds of rats. And although I don't think Last Crusade's rats are as disgusting as the animals that came before, much more of the tension comes from the massive fireball engulfing the sewer. With basically everything cranked up to the next level in terms of emotion, scale, and spectacle, Last Crusade feels like a perfect goodbye. And for a while, it was. 19 years separated Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But while it took nearly 2 decades for Jones to return to the screen, the legacy of Indy carried on through TV, books, comics, and video games. But the importance of physical stunts is evident in how Lucasfilm brought the series to life in the aptly named Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular! At Hollywood Studios and Walt Disney World, and the Indiana Jones Adventure Ride at Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea. Stunt Spectacular is a live show filled with, obviously, stunt work, as well as pyrotechnics and all manner of timed effects for an indie adventure in front of an audience. It's essentially putting this element of these films on display for everyone to focus on, and harkening back to the old school approach of the original, until another film finally arrived. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not a good movie, but its reputation due to waves of aggrieved fans right at the dawn of online fan criticism makes its reputation way worse than it actually is. We won't get into the nitty-gritty of aliens and accents and Shia LaBeouf, but what we will talk about is the loads of CGI. And I don't want this to be yet another piece of online criticism that only highlights the shortcomings of Crystal Skull, but instead, what I'd like to do is use this belated 4th film to highlight what makes the previous 3 special in the context of a film that contained many of the same types of elements. I would never call the Indiana Jones films realistic, but the amount of CGI sets, lack of real physicality, and action scenes that have no grounding make Crystal Skull far more removed from reality. The result is that it's an extremely silly film, almost a self-parody, and as a result, the action simply doesn't hit as hard as any of the movies that came before. Each of these movies has a sense of lightness, fun, and heightened escapism, but it's the practicality of the sets, the stunts, and the effects that make you feel the impact and stakes of everything. This is not an indictment of the use of CGI in movies. Plenty of great films are dependent on it, but in Indy, it just feels strange. Especially when everything that came before, and Crystal Skull itself, is trying to be a movie translating a bygone era. It also largely features a completely different crew behind the scenes, outside of our major players, with Gary Powell taking over as stunt coordinator and Dan Bradley assuming second unit director duties. There are a lot of cool sets and props seen throughout the film, but they're often augmented by CGI or housed within CGI environments, which makes it all a little bit harder to focus on the human feats done within them. What I'm saying is that there are actually a lot of great practical effects, sets, and stunts within Crystal Skull, but they get lost in the shuffle. Everyone talks about nuking the fridge, but the opening adventure is the high point of Crystal Skull, and has quite a few great real stunts. The jump from truck to truck, the big lamp swing and rafter run, swinging from a big chain and kicking this dude. It's good stuff. The motorcycle chase through academia is a great bit of practical vehicle stunts, and perfectly coordinated traffic control. Love the bit with Indy sliding behind the motorcycle in his dress shoes, and the slide through the library is a fun bit. If you look at the making of the sword duel, you can see that a lot of it was done on actual moving trucks. But so much is caked in CGI that it seems like it was just green screen. The movie's creepy crawly section, this time giant CGI ants, just proves my point further. The idea is cool, but in execution, it's totally forgettable. There's also a lot of shooting our actors from the waist up during action scenes, allowing for our actors to be on platforms and other safe grounds, and only pretending to ride or run or jump. Much safer for the older Ford and everyone involved, but not very interesting. There's also a strange lack of guns and the whip throughout, mostly concentrated in that opening sequence. Altogether, Crystal Skull is a step down from the original trilogy, but it's not because of the stunts, sets, costumes, or practical effects, but because of the larger package they're presented in. At the time of making this video, I haven't seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the belated and almost definitely final Indiana Jones film starring Harrison Ford, so I can't comment on the quality of stunts or the movie itself. Of course, with Ford being 80 years old and de-aging used for an extended opening sequence, a combination of stunt doubles, safer shots, and CGI will definitely come together for the film's action. How well that's made is yet to be seen. By me again. I'm making this in the past. But whatever the future holds for Indiana Jones, Spielberg, Ford, Lucas, and most importantly, a group of some of the best stunt performers and coordinators ever put their bodies on the line and created some of the most iconic, breathtaking, and unforgettable moments in the history of film. And for that, we say thank you. Thanks for watching today's video, and I can't believe it took me this long to make a video about Indiana Jones. Like I said in the video, Indiana Jones was my own personal favorite series when I was a kid. I loved Star Wars, but Indiana Jones was where it was at, especially Last Crusade. And over the years, I've come to have new appreciation for each of these films over and over again. Well, maybe not Crystal Skull. I mean, slightly more than when I first saw it, but, not really. To me, the original trilogy are some of the best blockbusters ever made. And when you think adventure films, you automatically think Indiana Jones. Really, everything that came afterward has sort of been trying to copy it to some degree or another. And sometimes that works out well, and sometimes it doesn't. But in any case, I find the behind-the-scenes stories of the Indiana Jones films just as fascinating as the movies themselves. And thankfully, over the years, there have been so many different things written and made that document the behind-the-scenes of each movie. In particular, the book The Complete Making of Indiana Jones, the definitive story behind all 4 films by J.W. Rinsler, was a huge help in making this video. So if you want everything you ever wanted to know about the making of these movies, go buy that book. And so, with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny coming out, I thought now would be a perfect time to talk about these movies. But of course, there's been so many videos made about each of these movies, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And something that wasn't quite in line with my typical franchise retrospective video. And I just absolutely love the stunts of Indiana Jones. So I figured, hey, why not make a whole video just about stunts? It's something that I really haven't talked about in depth on any video on my channel before. And I really had a lot of fun doing this. So I would actually love to make more videos about Indiana Jones, talking about all the different aspects of behind the scenes, including the real legends used behind each film, maybe a history of unmade Indiana Jones movies, a video about the sound effects and music of Indiana Jones, one about the performances, of course obviously including Harrison Ford, but about all the different actors involved as well, and a video that goes more in depth about the practical effects, sets, and costumes, because each of those to me are such fascinating examples of modern blockbuster filmmaking done at the highest level. As I mentioned in the video, I'm making this before Dial of Destiny comes out, so I have no opinions about that movie, but I am hoping that it's good. We'll see. I'd love to know your thoughts about the Indiana Jones franchise. Maybe you could do your own ranking of the Indiana Jones movies, or maybe even tell me your favorite stunt in all of the movies. And as always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews, including a monthly wrap-up of what I've been playing, reading, and watching, as well as one exclusive review every month voted on by patrons. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and bringing a little adventure into your lives.